Welcome, everyone.
Hey.
We are just going to get started in 1 minute. Let me just pull up my notes. Okay, cool. So we have about 30 people watching. That's great. I'm so excited that all of you are here. Big shout out to Games for Change for hosting us. Today's panel is Unity for Humanity, Changemakers, and the New Frontier. And to give all of you some context, we're going to be talking about making social impact real-time 3D work. We're going to get into all of your projects and all that. So I'm going to be moderating. And so first off, I wanted to introduce myself. And then what I'll do is introduce each of you and then kind of like set out some goals for the audience and how they can, what they can expect to take away from our conversation. So just so everyone knows, I'm Paisley Smith. I'm a virtual reality creator, filmmaker, and producer for the Unity for Humanity program at Unity Technologies. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations in Vancouver, Canada. And I invite all of you in the audience to reflect on the ancestral land that you are on today. So before we begin, I'd like to thank our audience for joining us. And we're going to be having an enlightening, fun, and productive conversation about creating social impact work. So for those of you who are just joining, each of the panelists here today are recipients of the Unity for Humanity grant, which is, it's a grant supporting social impact creators and empowering people to make their best work. So I'm so excited to be here with all of you. It's my goal for every person who's watching today to feel inspired and energized and to leave with some solid tools that you can use to apply to creating your own social impact work. So hopefully you feel that productive energy in this conversation. I know that, with remote conversations, sometimes it can be a little bit fuzzy when you watch these things. So anyways, I want to start by introducing all of you. And the other thing I wanted to make note of is that we have, if you look on the screen, the audience, you can see this little Q&A function. We really encourage you to write your Q&As in there. And I believe if you go to that section, you can actually upvote questions. So while you're watching us have this conversation, make sure to make note of your questions and keep them in mind and let us know at the end, because we'll have time for those. All right, so I will start by introducing Elle. Elle Lim. Hi, Elle. Elle is based in Jakarta, Indonesia. He has a background in game production, art, marketing, and music. Elle is the founder and head developer for the game studio Kalayan Arts. The studio focuses on eco-friendly, cultural, and positive social values through interactive storytelling. His game, Samudra, is the recipient of the Unity for Humanity Grant 2020. And Samudra is an environmentally focused, hand-illustrated 2D puzzle game that follows a child's adventure across a polluted sea. The players will uncover the truth about what's causing this pollution as they move through this deep sea world. And one thing that's so exciting about Elle's work is that the projects are being channeled towards a collaboration with local ocean activists with the goal of minimizing plastic usage in Indonesia by 70% by 2025. So that's amazing. Next, I wanted to introduce Louis Weinstock. So, hi, Louis.
Hi.
Hi. Louis is a social entrepreneur and a child psychotherapist. He is the CEO of the award-winning charity A Part of Me, which helps young people transform their grief into compassion through the use of therapeutic mobile games. Louis was inspired to create A Part of Me when he was supporting families at a hospice in Hackney in London and helping parents with terminal illnesses talk to their kids about their life coming to an end. As we all know, grief really greatly affects children, and it can have a serious consequence on families and society at large. And yet, seeking support is a huge obstacle for young people. So, A Part of Me, Louis's project, is the recipient of the Unity for Humanity Grant 2020. And finally, I wanted to introduce Paige. Hi, Paige.
Hey.
Paige Wood is an award-winning multimedia filmmaker, screenwriter, and producer from Detroit. She is an adjunct instructor at Wayne State University, as well as the 2020 Kreisky Artist Fellow and alumni of Firelight Media's Impact Producer Cohort. Paige is the supervising producer of the Rise Home Stories project, which features over 5 narratives that are focused on housing and are supported by the Ford Foundation. So the project that we supported through Unity for Humanity is called Dot's Home, which is one of the Rise Home Stories. And yeah, like I said, it's a recipient of the Unity for Humanity grant. And Dot's Home is a narrative-driven, single-player video game about the experience of a young Black woman living in her grandmother's home in Detroit, Michigan. And Dot travels through time to witness key moments in her family's past, present, and future, where race, place, and home collide. And Dot's Home sheds light on systemic, racist housing policies and through the eyes of a multi-generational Black family navigating these very complex choices in the pursuit of something we all want, which is home. So that's some background on each of you, and I wanted to give you a really warm, I'll do it on behalf of the audience, a very warm welcome. So I'm going to dive into some questions, and each of you can, if you feel compelled to answer, just share your thoughts, but I will direct each of you to answer. So Paige, Louis, and Elle, each of you is obviously very drawn to making social impact real-time 3D work. I would love to know, on behalf of the audience, what really brought you from observing or participating in game or animation culture to actually making work? Like, what was the thing that led you from going from participation to like action and making work? So why don't we start with you, Elle? If you could give us some insight into your career journey, and yeah, I'd just love to hear about that.
Sure. So thank you, Paisley, and hello again, everyone, Paige and Louis, and all the audience tuning in today. Really happy to be here, and it's a pleasure really to be in this round table, or square table. Actually, it's 4 of us.
Square table, love it.
And as you can see, also apologies for the moody location here, but I'm actually at midnight right now, 12:30 midnight. So yeah, thanks for organizing this so late. But really happy to be here. And So hi, my name is Al. Paisley's already introduced me so nicely. I'm the head developer of Highland Arts. We are based in Jakarta, Indonesia. And as you already put it, we collaborate quite a lot with local activists here towards our singular goal of minimizing single plastic use to about 70% in 2025. So let's just get that out of the way. So I think your question is that how did they? How I started the company and what was the journey like, right? So I think I would say that I think you would agree that all of us here, I think, came from different backgrounds, but we all played a lot of different types of games and genres. But I think there was a period of gaming for me, specifically. Whatever you want to call it, is the indie renaissance or the gold rush, during the 2010s, basically, right? Where, there's just a boom of like indie developments. I think it has to do with the accessibility of getting access to smart devices at the time. So I think for consumers, it's very easy to find games, and also for developers to really just kind of like experiment without having to have the need to be with big publishers or AAA studios. And I kind of want to throw out some well-deserved well-deserved titles here, like Limbo, games like Limbo. I'm sure you guys have heard it. Braid, Journey, Machinarium, games at the time that were quite groundbreaking. In my eyes, at least, right? And I think a lot of people kind of relate to this as well. And I think looking down the road right now, I think we see a lot of evolutions to that. I was just listening just now to the talk from, I think his name is Rafael Bacamazo. I think it was the mental health talk, the MMA AMA with Rafael. So he was talking a little bit about mental health and how that is shown in different games. And nowadays you have games like Celeste, Florence, Little Nightmare, Spiritfarer, games that are really quite heavy in their subject, but are presented in really lighthearted way, in a very beautiful artistic way. And yeah, I kind of see a lot of similarities and parallel to all the games that we made here, three of us, with Paige and with Dot's Home, and especially with Louis, a part of me. It's very similar in terms of how Spiritfarer is also talking about loss and grief, right? So I think it's a very heavy subject, but packaged in a very beautiful way. So I feel like, knowing that kind of capability that game is capable of, basically, right? The kind of possibilities that you can actually create with games, and you can have such a communal effect on people, where people, players can just tune in on a face value. You can enjoy it as like just a beautiful game, but to those who knows really what's up, you can actually tune in and and kind of like experience it as a solace almost, right? So it's kind of like a healing anyway, in a way, like you play it and you heal, and it's very communal as well, because you get to go to forums and talk about it with people, like-minded people. So I think it's very easy, going back to your question, it's very easy to kind of like come up with this sort of thing, this sort of project, because knowing what games are capable of, it's very easy for me to pick, like, okay, this is how I want to say what I want to say, right? So our games also talk a little bit about depression, about mental health issue. You've already touched on a little bit, and I don't want to go on for too long here, but you touched on a little bit about how the story premise is about a kid that fell into the deep sea, and just trying to make his way back out, right? So I think in some ways it's, a lot of people can relate to this. You've been in rock bottom at some point of your life, and it's not easy to claw your way back out. So it's just kind of like my way of dealing with this, but in a surreal, abstract form, and very visual, very art driven. It's just an experience. So I think that's kind of like how this game really started, really, for us. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Elle. That was a really beautiful and personal, and some insight into your experience. And I do actually think that all of us have very different paths to creating work. I identify as a creator myself, and I actually don't come from a games background. So to hear how games have inspired you into creating work, I know Paige and Louis, both of you come from very different backgrounds as well. I come from film. Paige, it's my understanding that you come from animation. Do you want to share a little bit about like how animation has inspired you to make work?
Sure. I actually more so come from animation as a fan.
Okay, cool.
I've done work in animation on an independent lens as well, but I'm actually a filmmaker here in Detroit, work as producer, a screenwriter in a lot of regards. And what really had me coming into the work and seeing really media as something that can be used as a tool is my work with DNA, Detroit Narrative Agency. And so when I first went freelance, I had the opportunity to work with this organization that was prioritizing bringing to life stories by Black and Brown directors who are from Detroit, who have lived here, and we're looking to tell a story about the city in a way that hadn't been seen before. As you might know, Detroit is a city where the narratives that have been historically about here, especially the last 20 years, have mostly been about grief and turmoil, about how people have left, basically saying that either nothing is here, or because of the billionaires that have now come in, it's a blank slate and playground for people to do what with all of it. So DNA really did a 180 on those types of narratives. And the thing that was most poignant about those projects was the fact that it wasn't just about creating something new, creating something that allowed people to see themselves in the narrative, but also was paired with an impact campaign. something where we're going beyond visibility and thinking about how can audiences, our intended audiences, actually engage with this as a tool, and something that can either be used in organizing, that can be used for social change, something where it goes beyond just being a piece of media that people can watch and something that people can use. And so from there, that's how I actually got connected with the Rise Home Stories project. And what was really interesting about how Dots Home came about, impact was really ingrained in how Rise Home really works. We're working with Working Films, which does a lot of impact work in the docu-space. And a lot of the folks and collaborators who are involved in a creative level have experience in also doing this as well. But the reason why, back in, 2018, when we were debating of like, what should we make? Like all these things. The reason why a video game came about is because one of the organizers who's working on Dots Home, Christina Rosales, made a great point of the fact that beyond just packaging, as Elle said, beyond just packaging a beautiful game with really poignant themes, looking at systems and looking at things in a deeper context, games allow players to have the agency to determine their own story, as opposed to film in a lot of ways. It's kind of more so that observational stance. You're just waiting for the inevitable. You don't really have a choice in the story that you get to determine, whereas games allow you to have that agency. So that is kind of how Dots Home came about, and I came onto this as supervising producer back in 2018, so or less, but I don't know, time isn't real, so take that with a grain of salt. But, within that, I think going back to your original question of animation and how that sort of grounds it, with animation, as someone who's always been a fan since childhood, the thing that I love most about it is the fact that truly anything is possible. So you can explore so many different worlds in an illustrated context. And I think, as anyone knows who plays video games or who watches animation, just because it is in an illustrated context doesn't mean it's for kids. It can be for audiences of all ages. So with that element also combined, it really allowed us to think more deeply about how can we tell a story about systems that have actually, caused Black and Brown communities in the US to have to navigate in order to survive and thrive, but think about it in a beautiful context and one that goes beyond just playing the game, but thinking about how it can be used to further social change to make a future that people actually deserve.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so interesting to see, Elle, you come from experiencing all these amazing games during this like golden age of indie gaming, and Paige, your experience with observing animation and, working in collaboration with the Detroit Narrative Agency. Louis, I feel like your experience has been wildly different, but maybe that's just my perception of the fact that you're a psychotherapist, like have a totally different world. Like, are you able to walk us through how you found yourself in this space of deciding to create games? Like, I think that would be so interesting for our audience to hear.
Yeah, so actually I am not a huge gamer now, so I feel a bit embarrassed to say that in this community, but I was when I was a teenager up until my early 20s, and sort of the last big game that I used to love playing was GoldenEye with my friends at university. But actually I sort of, for various reasons, ended up on a career path where I was supporting vulnerable children and young people in different capacities, and I was running a therapeutic school in London, which was for teenagers who had basically been kicked out of lots of other schools. And now, in hindsight, I would say that they all had complex trauma, but back then we didn't really have that language, wasn't so current. So it was more just a therapeutic school. And during that time, I met the guys from Headspace, the mindfulness app. Although at that time they were just doing events. And I met actually Andy at a festival, and we started chatting, and I invited them in to come and do some mindfulness workshops with our kids, which was quite interesting. Difficult, definitely a challenge. And then they started to develop this app, which obviously became mega successful. And they invited me in to do some consulting work with them on their kids offering. And so I got more and more of an insight into how digital tools can be used creatively to support mental health. And then I was working in a hospice, which you said, thank you. So you did a really great intro, by the way. I should have recorded that because I think I'll put that as my bio. It was brilliant. Or as a part of his bio. So I was working in a hospice in Hackney, as you said, counselling both families where somebody, usually a parent, had a terminal illness, and also counselling young people when somebody, usually a parent, had died. And it was actually one person in particular who I met this person about 6 months after his dad died. And he'd basically ticked all the boxes that can go wrong if you don't get support for your grief. So basically he got kicked out of school, he took a drug overdose, he joined a gang, and before he found out that his dad had a terminal cancer, he was actually doing reasonably okay. He was, he wasn't sort of super successful or anything, but he was doing okay. But this was just a thing that tipped him over the edge. And now I know with hindsight and digging into all the research and producing our own research that actually it's very, very common when grief doesn't get supported that all of these problems, drug addictions, mental health problems, and sort of offending problems develop. So I started to realize, working with this boy, if only he had had a tool a bit earlier on in his journey that he could have used and accessed at any time without needing to come and sit in a room and chat to a guy like me who he doesn't really know. And, counseling is actually quite a white middle class thing, generally speaking. It also isn't that appropriate for everyone. There's lots of other ways of delivering therapy, which is something I was already experimenting with when I was running this therapeutic school. At that time, if you tried to get any of those kids to sit in a room with a therapist, it never happened. So we had to get really creative about how we delivered some of the sort of therapeutic wisdom in different ways. So then I met Ben, who's the co-founder. I met his wife, who was a child psychologist, on a meditation retreat. She said, oh, you should talk to my husband because he's really keen to use his skills for good. And we started chatting, and then we ran some co-design sessions with some young people at the hospice. We showed them some of the apps that we'd found that were roughly in this space. And they all looked at them and they all said, there's no way in a million years we would ever use anything like that. And so it's through a series of conversations that we ended up deciding with these young people that a game would be the best medium to deliver this stuff. And I really don't regret that decision at all, because, we've got lots of sort of data points that show us how effective the game has been so far. But also it just makes total sense to me, because as a therapist, when you're working in, in an actual space with a child or a young person, generally the best way to help them heal is to use creative, playful means. There's lots of science behind that. Right brain is the place where traumas are typically stored, in the right brain in the body, and you can't access that very easily by sitting down and talking. So also play and having a playful, creative environment like the island that a part of me is based in, that just helps people to feel safe so that they can actually work with or connect to some difficult feelings. So yeah, I think, does that answer the question? Can't even remember what the question was now, but I think you were just asking me for my story, basically.
That was really, really interesting. And honestly, I have what you were saying inspired a lot of other questions for me and a lot of personal reflection. I can't help, you probably have people do this, they start to, when you're talking about your project, start to reflect on their own experiences of grief and how they've gone through them or moved through that process. I mean, to me, moving through grief is a very physical process. For me, art and making work is how I personally move through grief, and that product and sharing the story is what makes me feel like it has meaning. And And I think a lot of what you've done with A Part of Me is actually making that process accessible to audiences, right? In the process of sharing your story or leaving messages on the island, you're actually participating in giving your brief a voice, and having other people share that story allows that process to be, multiplied. So it's really, really interesting. And one of the other things I was thinking about is that, in all of our projects, there's an element of kind of like otherworldliness, or this kind of mystical space that allows each of our projects to be, I'm saying our, but the three of you, to be able to, you see this like very real issue, right? Systemic racism or grief or waste in the ocean. These are very real world issues. But when you access these games, you're able to access it from almost a magical world. And I'm wondering how that allows audiences to really access the real issue, and if you've thought much about that world or that kind of like magic space. Paige, do you feel like it's helped audiences move through housing systems?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if I was being honest, like a game where you're just looking at redlining for what it is, which is very traumatic and boring.
Yeah,
so, when we came together to think more about how are we going to explore these systems in a way that's interesting in the sense of how you can learn from them, but still shows them for what they are. I think adding the magical realism context took the game from just being about a straightforward look at the harms that have been perpetrated against Black and Brown communities, and something where at the center, the story is actually about family and joy and legacy, about how are you seeing the choices that your family had to navigate in order to secure joy for you or generations to come. And so it actually really changed the, I guess I would say, tone of the story we could tell, and then open that possibility. Because, with time travel, we went back to like 1950, we could go back even further. We travel to the future, all these things. It just opens the door for one, so many more possibilities. And two, it tells a story that if you're Black or brown in America, you know what's up. You don't need someone to really regurgitate what you already have to live through. But if you tell it in a way that's in a way that's interesting, and through a story that's not about, once again, looking at pain, but looking at legacy and allowing you to reflect on, well, how did I get to where I am today, or what choices did my family have to make in order for me to be right where I am now? That's where that sort of internalized and introspectiveness comes through, I think, with that tone.
So the magical space allows for this personal reflection in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think for even me personally, some of the most, I guess, introspective games that I have played have allowed me, even if I don't have an exact relation to, say, the main character or some of the theme or some of the like story plots, like they could be as out there as, God knows what, but I can always take that back and say, how are they dealing with this issue, and how would I? And I think there's that, one-to-oneness where even if things aren't an exact copy of a replica of what you live, there's always a way you can find to relate in sort of these fantastical spaces.
So true. Elle, is this a similar sort of approach to how you create Samudra, or how are you thinking about fantasy and magical realism in the creation of your project?
For sure. I think Paige already touches upon, the fact that having that kind of gave you flexibility, right? As a creative person to kind of tell a story, you can kind of just transport somebody to a different time, different period, different situations, much more easily. I think people will be taken also by this kind of approach. And so that's also kind of like how we similarly approach in designing Samudra, because we never claim to be educational or I wish I can call myself an activist, but really, yes, I've been participating in a lot of those events, like beach cleaning and stuff like that, and collaborating. But really, there are more people out there here in Jakarta who's been fighting for this for like years and years, and they deserve that title. But I'm just a developer, right? And I just kind of like want to show what that world is like, and just show the pain, I guess, like the kind of adversity and obstacles that you go through. Just to give you an example, if you've never been to a beach cleaning event, right? You go there with like 200 people, you show up with all these people, right? And you spend a whole day cleaning, and you're not making a dent. You're going home with the same beach looking the same. It's just so much rubbish. So it's a different kind of perspective, and I think this is something that I don't exactly know the saying, but it's kind of like you don't see it and you don't feel it, right? It's out there. You don't just see it all the time. You're in the city. You don't really relate to it. So this is how we're bringing this to an audience that is, I guess, a little bit more outside of what usually is targeted for this sort of awareness, right? So this is how we're doing it. We're bringing it to younger audience, and we're bringing it to gamers as a game first, not as a data, right? It's not data. It's not like some kind of promotional thing or campaign. It's a game. It's a story. It's a very personal story, as I've already touched upon earlier, but it has a very strong underlying theme of pollution that we really want to talk about, and we want to share with people in a very visual way. So I think fantasy or surrealism is like the way to go, because then people, I think, will be the audience can probably how do you want to say this, like have an impact. Like I think visually you just remember things better. So to have a character in our game, like for example, like a massive turtle, like a giant turtle, right? But it's got that, I'm sure you've seen the picture where it's got wrapped up by a beer ring, the plastic beer ring. And then we kind of exaggerate that, right, to make that like a main thing in the game. Like you come across this character, just kind of like it help you visualize and remember, I suppose, because then people come up to me and started telling me about how that's kind of like something that is very memorable, and it just kind of like make them search for it. Like, is this true? Is this not true? Is this really happening? So just kind of like to have that going. I think that's the main goal for us. And then from there, you can kind of like look up and we can start to push a little bit further on what to do, what kind of solutions we can kind of come up with, what we can do together. So yeah, I think surrealism is definitely the way to go. Yeah. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
It was a really fabulous answer, El. Something that you said that stuck out for me was that if you don't see it, if you don't see things happening in your daily life, but if you play this game, you can feel it, and then you can do something about it. And so I think that is where the connection for me between social impact and making real physical world change and story and magical realism in these games and experiences is so essential. And I feel like, Louis, your project, A Part of Me, really is a very like almost like a literal version of this. Like there is this magical world where people can leave their personal notes, which you find, and then you can reflect on your actual physical lived experience. Do you want to share a little bit about that? And how you're thinking about that?
So from very early on, we had a core design principle, which was that we really wanted, where possible, to connect the virtual world to the real world, and to experiment, see how we could use this game to support meaningful real world connections. Because as a sort of therapist, probably fairly obviously, I really value the sort of healing importance of real world connections, which sadly, especially for young people, are in some ways becoming harder to access. You know, I think it's the same in the States as it is in the UK and in lots of modern Western countries, at least. There's this epidemic of loneliness. And one of the really sad sort of bits of research about grief is that for a young person who's feeling lonely at the time of their grief, they're much more likely to make a suicide attempt. So, you know, for me, things like that just really heighten the importance of connecting the two worlds. And the other thought that popped into my mind when I was listening to Paige and Elle was that actually, you know, there's so many different ways of perceiving. I don't want to get too sort of mystical or philosophical about this, but there's so many different ways of perceiving. Am I giving the green card? There's so many different ways of perceiving reality, and I actually think that if you dig down to the root of so many of the problems that we're all trying to address through games, it's actually a problem in how we're perceiving reality. So I think another great possibility that we can have by building these bridges between virtual worlds and real world is actually really shifting people's perception, not just in the game, but actually if you can leave a game experience and you're walking around your neighborhood or you're walking along your beach, or even going into the classroom and suddenly you're seeing things like with a fresh perspective, you're seeing things differently. That's what I think is really exciting about this sort of medium that we're all exploring.
I just want to quickly uplift what you just said. That's really great. And also what we're trying to do with Dots Home as well is, you know, how can you shift from what we're calling these dominant narratives, but these sort of baked in ideas that we sort of accepted as we can't fight back against. They're kind of just the way the world works, and shift the perspective on the fact that no, these can be changed, these should be changed, and we have the power to do so. Yeah, it's definitely something that games and just in general, when you think about this type of media creation, you know, can't afford, and what we're trying to do as well. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you. Definitely agree with you.
I sometimes think, I know this is sort of a stupid thought, but I sometimes think about like games and films and media that really challenges us to reflect on our own lives and push back against what we've been taught as kind of like imagination training wheels. And so like the idea is that like as you game and as you watch and consume, you reflect, and you're not just sitting there and absently consuming. Like we all know that as media makers and consumers, we're participants in this content, even if it's just watching a film, right? The idea is that the audience, once the training wheels are taken off, that they can then zoom forward and have that momentum to reflect in their own lives. So I think that all of us are like really like doing that, and it's really, really amazing to see. And as these projects take off and go into the world, to just imagine all these little bicycles of people after they've consumed the content, like riding into their lives, you know, it's pretty cool. So one thing that I was thinking about, and I'm sorry, I'm just sort of spitballing right here because I do have like questions that I came to talk about, but I'm feeling really inspired by our conversation. So one thing that I'm thinking about is how like community comes into this. And, you know, so much of what you just said, Louis, and actually all of us have been talking about this, like there's this loneliness, and I think we think of games and content as being somewhat lonely, but there's a lot of community. Paige, you touched on this with the Detroit Narrative Agency, like how we're thinking about either like communities activating the work that we're making or how communities are engaged in the content we're consuming. And I'd just like to hear of how you are using these mediums to engage deeper with communities around you as a way of achieving impact. Paige, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think there's multiple layers to that question, right? You know, I think In terms of, and I'll try to make sure I answer as many of those as possible, but in terms of like even the gameplay, you know, Dot's home is, yes, a single player game, but the idea is you're actually engaging with your family, your family in this way that invites conversation about legacy, about how you came today. So it's something where the takeaway really expands to it being more of a community level experience. But even in sort of going back to the development and creation aspect, you know, I would say one thing that's different about Dot's Home is the fact that we are kind of trying to redefine the model and how games are made. We're not just mining for stories and then making the game. It's where the storytellers, the organizers, those of lived experience are part of the game development, and from start to finish are really acting as sort of the holders of the story and making sure this is a reflection of the experiences they know. And then on that other end, that the developers, artists, writers themselves also have some hand in knowing what this experience is about, can speak from their own lives to help inform the story and take it further, or inform gameplay, inform design and take it further. So on engaging with community in the creation level, that was, you know, even going beyond having a finished game and having it something where audiences can react to and engage with, that's something that we prioritize from the onset in just creating a game, so we're able to make sure that that reflection is true to ourselves. And I would say, finally, with the sort of engagement piece, thinking about impact, once again, that reflection piece is important because I also don't believe that social change is about visibility or representation. I don't think representation will save us. So it's really about how are we building new economies or new models for creation that are reflective of stories we're trying to tell and those who have lived it. But then with the community portion or intended audience or impacted audiences portion of this, we're thinking about how can they inform how this is used, not just you know, having this be out into the world and it's do what makes sense to, you know, whatever, but really being part of the impact design process in a way where we're thinking about how this best serves who needs it, and in what way this can be designed beyond, in the film context, I would think of curriculums and post-screening discussions, but really creative ways that this can be an evergreen organizing tool for creating change in the way that we need it around land and home. I hope that answered your question.
It was awesome. I loved it. That was great. Thank you so much. Ella, would you like to kind of reflect on that community element? I know that you want to use this eventually for fundraising, and that's a very physical manifestation of community. But I also know that you have a studio, and so maybe you can speak to production and your community connection.
Yeah. Well, that's like Paige said, there's a lot of layers to this. But I think well, our studio, for Samudra, it's not even out yet, right? So our game right now is still in development. So there's still a lot of plans on how we're gonna be utilizing this to kind of like create that sort of communal activities like beach cleaning and things like that. We can kind of organize through this game, but outside of this, with our other projects, so. In our studio, we do collaborate with local activists here, right? So like non-governmental organizations here, as I've already mentioned earlier, towards like one single goal of right now, the very immediate goal is to have a single-use plastic to be reduced by 70%. And that is not something that is easy to do, especially on your own. It's just especially also in a country like Indonesia, where there's still we're a developing country. So I think there's a lot of you can certainly feel it if you live here, that this sort of campaigns or environmental sort of take on things are just not on the forefront of priorities here. It's just tough. It's tough to really get things going in this sort of area, right? So I think, so how we did it, how we've been doing it is all year round since the conception of our studio in 2019. We've been collaborating quite closely in whatever chance that we get here. We just collaborate quite closely with our friends from local organizations here in many ways that we can, whatever we can support in creative ways like workshops, exhibitions, art installations, beach cleanups, and parades as well. And all of it, and I'm just really genuinely very, very honored to be able to be doing this type of things, to be invited to be a part of these collaborations, because I think we are starting to see like some of the impacts that we've been doing, right? So like 2 years ago, we're a part of this parade called the how do you call it in English? Like a plastic free march. I think that's what you call it, like plastic free parade, where there's like a gathering of about a few thousand people, 2,000-ish people in our city center, where we campaign towards the banning of plastic at the time. So yeah, we're kind of backwards in the sense that in 2019 we still have a lot of issues where we're still using straws and things like that. And that parade directly caused the banning of plastic bag last year, and then we just had a milestone just about a month ago, right? In the 1st of July, in fact, just really about a month ago, where the data says that we have a reduction in numbers of plastic to about 82% in retails in 3 areas, like supermarket, wet market, and also convenience store, which is really amazing considering it's also a pandemic, right? So, and then in the household, we have about a reduction to about 42%. So these are all very small steps, but it's nevertheless a really good, great milestone for us. Something is happening right now, right? And we're directly a part of this. And again, I cannot attribute all of this to myself or my team. This is all really thanks to all the activists out here who are spearheading this community of people to just work towards this really amazing goal. And I think going back a little bit, I think everyone here really understands that Indonesia, we're an archipelago. We have lots of islands here. I'm sure you guys have heard of Bali or Papua. It's the destination for diving, for nature, and a lot of these activists comes from this area as well. And it's just kind of sad when you go on a vacation and then you start to see when you just want to be having a good time, a chill time on the beach, but then you come across a plastic bottle on your feet, right? So it's just like that kind of thing that is in everybody's psyche right now, and everyone's working together towards this goal of just like making sure we have something for the next generation. Really, we have all these beautiful places. We just want to make sure that we keep it. So yeah, that's how we've been kind of collaborating with the community here. We're just a silly game creator. We are not really, we just love to make games. We just love art and, just to tell stories. So we're really, really honored to be able to be a part of that kind of thing and, just get invited all the time. And yeah, even just to sit here and just have a conversation with you guys, it's just surreal. It's just a pleasure. But I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does. Thank you, El. We're getting really close to the end of our time, so I want to just, before we wrap up, I just wanted to leave our audience with a solid piece of advice. If each of you was able to share one thing as a social impact creator that you would love to share with someone who's thinking about an idea, maybe for a game, and they want to create something, what is a piece of advice you would give them that's really useful in achieving this goal? I know that's a it could be really hard, but it can be something very like specific or simple. It doesn't have to be complicated.
I'm happy to start. I would say, things take time, and you need to be patient and persistent. If you believe in an idea strongly enough, then you will find a way to realize it. And also, if I can just squeeze in an extra bit to that is, if you are able to be clear in your idea and articulate it with the passion, you will attract resources. Like, not talking just about the Unity grant, which is amazing, but through a part of me, which is a charity, we now grown our community to 140 volunteers from around the world.
Wow.
Just because of the idea and the mission and the recognized sort of urgency of the need.
That's great. That's a really good piece of advice. Elle, do you have something you would love to leave the audience with?
I think it's just as simple as being genuine, I guess, with whatever message that you're trying to put out. It's just be genuine and be passionate about it. And I think the audience will be able to tell if you put in the love. Yeah, I think as simple as that, really. Just be genuine.
Amazing. Thanks, Elle. Paige?
I would say it's one, making sure you have peoples of lived experience, hiring Black and Brown POC creators to be in leadership throughout the development of any sort of game idea that you have. And also that if you have the money to make these things or your funder, fund these types of projects. I think with indie creators, there's definitely we'll get it done by any means necessary type of attitude, but it would also be really nice if we had resources to help be able to support that.
So true. Very well said. Each of you have been so incredible and generous with your wisdom and your experience and sharing that with us today. I wanted to thank you all so much for being here, especially you, Elle. I know it's so late for you, so props for making it through this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, really.
And to our audience, thank you for being here. Games for Change, thanks for hosting us. And to anyone who's interested in applying to the Unity for Humanity grant, please check out the Unity for Humanity website for updates as they come up. And there's a newsletter you can subscribe to for social impact. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the festival.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.